The Birkat Kohanim, the bracha that the Kohanim give us in Eretz Yisrael, we have it every single morning, and in Chutz La'aretz it's on Yom Tov. And I think that if you understand the technology of the bracha, how it works, you'll be able to get a lot more out of it. Now, even if you don't understand a whole lot, you just stand in shul while the Kohanim do their thing, there's a lot of benefit, there's a lot of bracha that comes to that. But if you know how to use the instrument, like any instrument, its effectiveness is multiplied. And people go to a lot of effort and expense sometimes to get brachas. And they'll go to the other end of the world, and they'll go to other cities, and they'll pay a lot of money to get some Rebbe to give them a bracha, and that's fine. But you can get it free every morning, and it's more powerful than any other bracha you could get if you know how to access it. So I know it's more exotic to go to some Rebbe who's in some village somewhere up in the mountains and get a bracha from him. It's certainly more of a conversation piece than to say, I was in shul this morning and I heard Birchas Kohanim. Nobody wants to hear that. But to say, I went to so-and-so, and wow, Reb so-and-so, he's such a holy man, and he gave me this amazing bracha. All fantastic and wonderful, but nothing like the Kohanim. And what they're able to do if we know how to tune into that. And in the process of doing that, we'll be able to appreciate some other important life principles as well. The psukim are in the Parashat Vayadeber Hashem el Moshe lemar. Hashem speaks to Moshe saying, and there's a few words in the pasuk which are really important, and I've given sources, they're also available on the app. Daber el Aharon ve'el banav lemor, speak to Aaron, the Kohen, and to his sons, the Kohanim, saying, Ko tevarchu et bnei Yisrael, thus shall you bless the bnei Yisrael. This is the way to do it. So there's a formula. There's a specific way to give us the bracha. And then the pasuk adds on two words which don't seem to be necessary. Emor lahem, say to them. Now he's just said, tell Aaron and his sons, Ko tevarchu, this is the formula. And then it says, Emor lahem, which seems to imply there's a conversation taking place. That Emor lahem means it's not just the Kohanim standing up on the duchen with their hands stretched out, their talis over their heads, babbling off some formula. There's actually a conversation between the community and the Kohanim. And in order to access the full power of the bracha, it's important that you participate in that conversation and that you don't stand passively. Yivarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, ya'er Hashem panav elecha v'choneka, Yisa Hashem panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. That's the bracha. 3 short sentences. And then Hashem adds in the Torah, V'samu et shemi al b'nei Yisrael, and they, the Kohanim, will put my name onto the b'nei Yisrael, onto the community. And then listen to these words. Va'ani avarchem, and then I will bless them. So who's blessing us, the Kohanim or Hashem? And if it's Hashem, why do we need the Kohanim? And if it's the Kohanim, why does he say that it'll be that Hashem will be blessing us? So Rashi says, and I'm going to take you through some specific material in order to understand it fully. Rashi says, Va'ani avarchem leYisrael. That means not I will bless the Kohanim. Some understand that to mean Hashem will bless the Kohanim for blessing us. Their reward will be that He'll bless them. Ani avarchem leYisrael ve'askim im HaKohanim. I will agree, I will give my stamp of approval to what the Kohanim said, says Hashem. I will endorse their bracha. Says the Sifsei Chachomim. Now the Sifsei Chachomim is a very useful and dangerous perush. So I'm going to use the opportunity to give you insight into the perushim and how to use them. The Sifsei Chachomim, 17th century, first published in Amsterdam, Reb Shabtai Bas. And every version of Chumash and Rashi either has the Siftei Chachamim or what we call the Ikar Siftei Chachamim. Somebody abridged it. And in some versions you'll have the shortened version of the Siftei Chachamim or the longer version. And it helps quite a lot to understand Rashi. But I'll tell you why it's dangerous in a moment. And he says, Aval ein lefaresh sheyevarchu ba'atzmo, sheyevarchem ba'atzmo. Even though Rashi said, and I will agree with the Kohanim, that does not mean that Hashem will bless us. This is not about Hashem blessing us. The imkein to'elet b'virkat HaKohanim kivan she'Hashem birchem. The imkein ma to'elet b'virkat HaKohanim kivan she'Hashem birchem. What is the point of the birkat Kohanim? If Hashem is going to bless us in any case, we don't need the Kohanim for that. What is there? Oh, a good point he makes. What does Rashi mean when he says v'askim im HaKohanim? What does it mean? I'm going to bless you, or I will endorse the bracha of the Kohanim, but the Kohanim are the ones who are doing the blessing. Says the Siftei Chachamim, that's the way to understand Rashi. It can't possibly mean that Hashem is going to bless us because then the role of the Kohanim is redundant. Fine, that makes a lot of sense. Except, the Gemara says in Chulin, Daf Mem Tes, Rabbi Akiva Omer, Keshehu Omer va'ani avarchem, when the Torah says, and I will bless them, Heve Omer Kohanim avarchem liYisrael, that means, I might have thought that the Kohanim are blessing the Jewish people, Va'kodesh Baruch Hu maskim al yadam, and the Ribono Shel Olam agrees with them. This agreement, in a sense, is Hashem blessing us, Hashem almost doing what it is they want. So we've got to look at this rather carefully. The Baal HaTurim works out the gematria and says Va'ani Avarchein means Askima al Yedeichem. It means I will endorse, I will agree what you've done. So we've got a Gemara that says clearly what Rashi says. The Siftei Chachamim warns us that it doesn't mean that Hashem is blessing us, it just means that Hashem agrees with their blessing. Do we really need that? Hashem's got to endorse it, and if he doesn't endorse it, it doesn't work. Why wouldn't he endorse it if he's told them to bless us? The whole thing doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And when you see a piece of Chumash that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, then you know you're onto something exciting. And that's how you've got to learn Chumash. When you go through Chumash and everything reads quite fine, you know you're either reading it superficially, or you're very tired, or you're reading it like you were taught in first grades. And we never graduate from that. We're taught as children how to read the Chumash, and that's the way we read the Chumash till now. But if you just stop and take it to pieces and unpack it and try and understand it, you see that there's a whole lot that one has to understand. When I spoke, I think it was the Matmonim shir about Shmiya, about listening, and I said, listening is not about hearing the words of another person. Nobody means what they say. We never mean what we say. If I say, how are you, do I mean it? I'm not interested. And if you say, fine, thanks, and you, are you really fine? You don't mean fine, thanks. I don't mean how are you. We never mean what we say. And most of what we say, we don't mean. So if you're listening to somebody, you've got to listen to what they're not saying. You've got to listen to what's between the words. And it's exactly the same in the Torah or in Gemara. It's not the words. It's between the words. It's understanding the nuance, understanding the meaning. That's what listening means. And that's why we don't listen to each other. That's why you'll often hear people say it, particularly in marriages, he doesn't listen to me. It's usually she saying he doesn't listen to me for good reason. He doesn't listen to me. He doesn't hear me. It doesn't, and he says, but I do. I listen to you all the time. You never stop talking. And she says, you see, he doesn't listen to me. So what's going on? What he's saying is, I listen to you speaking, and you speak too much. The reason you speak too much, she will say, is because you're not hearing me. And he's saying, I'm hearing you. What she's saying is, you're listening to my words. That's not what's important. You're not hearing my tone. So why don't you say what you mean? The answer is because we don't have words to express what we mean. Words are too clumsy we're not poets. And even poetry, if you read poetry, do you really understand what the poet intended? So we don't have the means. And we have to develop the capacity to understand between the letters, between the words, between the lines. So it is here. How often do we hear this? This piece of Chumash, we read it every year several times, we hear it every day, and we say it every day. And yet, when you stop and try and understand what's going on between the words, things are very different. We have an observation and a question. The observation is, emor lahem, there's a suggestion of a conversation taking place. What is the role of the community? How do we interact? What are we meant to be doing while the Kohanim are blessing us? And va'ani avarchem, what is God's role? The reason I said the Siftei Chachamim is dangerous is because as many anthologies are dangerous, the Siftei Chachamim is not an original Perush. The Siftei Chachamim gathers insights from others who commented on Rashi, particularly from the Mizrahi. Rabbi Mizrahi was one of the primary commentators on Rashi. Deep and complex, very important commentator. On every line of Rashi, there are pages of Mizrahi. Just to explain the Rashis. The Mizrahi himself is an interesting person. 15th century, he was from Turkey. He was like the chief rabbi of the Ottoman Empire, fluent in Greek and fluent in Latin, a mathematician, a scientist, a physician. These people, we look at it today, and we look at our religious community, and if they can speak one language fairly competently, we're impressed already. But this idea of Gedolei Yisrael and Talmidei Chachomim being so super educated and able to engage with anybody in the world, in their language, in their field, in their sphere, not cramped into some little corner from which they look at the world and say they're looking at it with a Torah perspective, but you're not seeing enough of it to even use a Torah perspective. So it's just beautiful to know who these people were and the power of them. And it's the Mizrahi who asks this question. It can't be Hashem blessing the Jewish people, because then what's the Kohen? What's the role of the Kohen? The problem is the Mizrahi then goes on with about 50 lines of interpretation, which the Sefer HaChinuch doesn't mention. So when you're looking at quotations and you're looking at cut and paste, which you see they used to do already in the 17th, in the 16th century, to take a little quote and to stick it in and take another one and stick it in, you don't get the context, and you don't get the nuance, and you don't get the depth. And that's why I say the Sefer HaChinuch is helpful but potentially dangerous. Helpful because he solves immediate problems, but he doesn't get the whole picture. That's not his purpose. If you want the whole picture, you've got to go into the Mizrahi and learn it properly. Let's now start unpacking the Birkat Kohanim with a little bit more detail, and start with the Targum Onkelos. You'll know, those of you who have learned with me already know that one of the first places I go to is Onkelos, one of the very first, if not the first, translations of the Torah, certainly into Aramaic, and it's just it's said that it was given to him from Shemayim. It is so perfect and so authentic that it's considered a divine work. Onkelos the Ger, he was a convert. And Onkelos translates it as follows: Malel im Aaron v'im benoi, speak to Aaron and his sons, lemeimar, to say, all fine, kedein tevarchun yat b'nei Yisrael, in the following way you shall bless the Jewish people. And then he adds on, kad yemrun lohon, when they will tell them to. And from here we see the two-way conversation that Onkelos is suggesting here already, that the community has to tell the Kohen to bless them. It's not just for the Kohen to go up. So you'll notice in the shul when the Kohanim goes up, somebody shouts out loud, KOHANIM, right? That's not just a ritual thing. That's starting the two-way conversation. So let's understand, and you see that already in the Onkelos. So when it says Emor Lahem, look how Onkelos is reading this. Speak to Aaron and to his children, saying, this is how you should bless the children of Israel. Emor Lahem, children of Israel, tell them that you want a blessing. That's the Emor Lahem, says Onkelos. Rashi learns the Emor Lahem a little different, he says, but it's also about conversation. Emor Lahem, what is Lahem? Say to them. You're blessing them. What's Lahem? What do you have to say to them? Shiyu kulam shom'im, that the people hear. So our first role, there are two roles that have come up. We have to ask for the bracha, and we have to listen. You can't just be on your cell phone while the Kohanim are doing the Birkas Kohanim, or you're busy paging in the Chumash and going over the Parasha. That doesn't work. No bracha. So you're just wasting an incredible opportunity. You've got to listen. Emor shu kulam shomim. Make sure they're all listening. Emor, and it says Emor with a vav, malay, a full spelt out Emor. Lo tevarchem b'chipazon v'halut. Don't rush the bracha, Kohanim. Ela b'kavana uvelev shalem. Put a lot of intention and heart into that bracha. Have your mind, kavanah is your mind has to be focused on the bracha, and your heart has to be in the bracha. The Bechaya says, Lo mipnei she'amarti lachem she'tiyu mevarchim et Yisrael tiyu mevarchim otam be'negri overhalut. Don't do it because I told you to. This is very unusual in the Torah. We're often told, do a mitzvah because Hashem told us to do the mitzvah. That's the most important reason to do it. In this case, says Rabbeinu Bechaya, don't do it because I told you to. Ela tiyu mevarchim otam be'kavanat halev. Do it from your hearts. When the Kohen gets up onto that duchen, he's got to do that. He's got to be able to give that bracha from the fullness of his heart, not just because he's checking off a mitzvah, this is the thing you're supposed to do at this time, but that he's really doing something from the fullness of his heart. So now let's go a step further in this this conversation that's going on between us and the Kohanim, and we bring in a third party into the conversation. This is now not a two-way conversation, it's a three-way conversation. Says the Rashbam, Lo tevarchu mibirchat pichem, ki adam sheomer tvuata lerosh ploni kach v'kach. Don't give them a brocha in the normal way. A normal brocha is, may you have lots of nachas. May you do well in business. May you have a refuah shlema. That's how we give brochas. No, says the Rashbam, Hashem says, Ella, Elai titpalelu. Your job, Kohanim, is to daven to me. The Birkas Kohanim is a tefillah. The Birkas Kohanim is not a brocha in the normal sense of the word. You are davening to me, she'avarchem ani. You're asking me to bless them. You're not blessing them. What is the wording? Hashem v'yishmerecha. May Hashem bless you. Yisa Hashem panav elecha. That you just look at the language. If you just translate the brocha, it's clear that you're not blessing us. You're asking Hashem to bless us. Va'ani eshma kolchem kasher tomru. And I will listen to your voice, Kohanim. Va'avarchem liYisrael. And I will bless the Jewish people. Exactly what the Siftei Chachamim says it can't mean, the Rashbam says that's exactly what it does mean. It means that Hashem is blessing us. So what's our question now? So what do we need the Kohanim for? If Hashem wants to bless us, let Him bless us. Does He need Kohanim? So from here we learn a piece of Sefer HaChinuch. Sefer HaChinuch, one of the Rishonim, a medieval authority, we don't know who it is, written anonymously, but be that as it may, it's a classical work that goes through every one of the 613 mitzvot, explains the mitzvah, the halachot of the mitzvah, the origin of the mitzvah, and a little bit of the philosophy of the mitzvah. And he wrote it for his son, so that his son wouldn't play basketball on Shabbos. Instead, he would read the Minchas Chinuch on the Parashat. That's what he did. Look at the dedication of some fathers. What they're willing to do to keep the child in a Shabbos-dika environment. They're willing to write an entire sefer so that the child would have something to learn on Shabbos. But he says, "Va'al tetama lemor v'lu chafetz Hashem bevirchatam yetzavotam et habracha ve'en tzorech bevirchat hakohanim." You might ask the question that the Siftei Chachamim asked, and you might say, "Why would Hashem need the Kohanim?" So don't ask that question. If you're concerned and you're wondering why is it that we need the Kohanim, if Hashem is giving us a blessing, then isn't that sufficient? So here's how the Sefer HaChinuch explains it. Kvar higdamti lecha pa'amim rabot. It's writing to his son. He says, because I've told you already many times, ki bekoach hechsher ma'aseinu tachul habracha aleinu. That bracha comes to us by virtue of the actions we do. Bracha can't come completely passively, that we just sit quietly and we get a bracha. We have to be active in that bracha as well. Ki yado baruch hu ptucha lekol shoel. Hashem's hand is open to anybody who asks. Biyoto muchsharu muchan lekabalat hatov. If a person has prepared himself and is ready to receive that goodness. There's got to actually be receptivity. Hashem chose us from all the nations, wants us to get His goodness, and He advised us to prepare ourselves to make sure that we can merit the good. And here's the key. He also commanded us levakesh mimenu habracha, to ask Him for bracha. He's instructed us to ask Him for bracha. V'shenish'alota al yedei ha'meshartim ha'teorim, and to ask it by means of Hashem's pure servants, the Kohanim. Ki kol ze yezchut lenafshotenu mitachach nizkeh b'tuvo, because that's the way we'll get the zchut and benefit from the goodness of Hashem. So again, the role of the Kohanim is to daven to Hashem for bracha to the people. We have to ask the Kohanim, and we've got to ask the Kohanim to ask Hashem, and then Hashem gives the bracha to us. There's a whole series of events that has to take place. And the two pieces that are crucial is our accepting, number one, and number two, our asking. And those are the two pieces I want to emphasize. The need to ask and the need to receive. The Chofetz Chaim and the Bir Halacha in Siman Kuf Kaf Chet writes in the name of the Sefer HaCharedim that there's a mitzvah taseh, a positive mitzvah for the Kohen to bless the Jewish people. VeYisrael ha'omdim panim keneged pnei HaKohanim, And the community who stands face to face opposite the Kohanim, bishtika, silently. Umechavnim libam lekabel birchatam, and they apply their minds to receive the brocha. Heim nami bichlal mitzvah, they fulfill the mitzvah too. And there's a lot of discussion which we won't get into. Is it the same mitzvah? Are these two separate mitzvahs? But the receiving of the brocha is in and of itself a mitzvah. The giving of the brocha is a mitzvah, and the receiving of we're instructed to receive it. But we've got to be active. There's a way to receive it. You've got to listen, you've got to be attentive, you've got to have the desire to receive this, to take it in. So I want to spend a few minutes talking about these two elements, asking and receiving. To be mekabel and to be shoel. The idea of being mekabel, the idea of receiving. It's interesting that in the Torah, whenever the word shema is used, or shomea, which means listen, Unklus translates it as tekabel, accept, receive. Listening means receiving. You can't imagine how much wisdom there is in that comment. Listening means receiving. Receiving means you take it in. It doesn't just mean you're listening with your ear. So, for example, if somebody gives one tochacha, somebody gives you some negative feedback, you can listen without even hearing what they're saying, because you become defensive and you turn off and you're busy defending yourself and undermining the other person in your mind. You can listen with your ears, and that's all of it, or you can take it in. And with taking it in is painful. If you really are taking it in, it's painful. But that's what being mekabel means. Listening to Hashem means taking His words in. If your husband or your wife is talking to you, it means taking their words in. If a child is talking to you, it means taking their words in. Being able to hear, and not just being able to hear with your ears. The ears are just the outer vehicle to get the sound waves. But then you've got to take it into your heart and to be able to feel it when you're learning Torah, to hear, to be able to listen. We say in the bracha before the Shema, lishmoa lilmod lelamed. Before you can learn and teach Torah, lishmoa, you have to hear it, and hearing it is the difficult part. So this idea that in order to receive bracha, there needs to be an openness to it. There needs to be an ability to receive. The other piece is the ability to ask, because a precondition for being able to receive is to be able to ask. Let's start with the receiving side. I want you to appreciate that receiving is not passive, and that receiving is not just for the good of the receiver. When you really receive, you are facilitating the giving. There is amazing chesed and generosity in the act of receiving, if one knows how to receive. Because there's nothing so off-putting for a giver to give and the other person isn't taking it. It's incredibly deflating and disappointing. Even if they don't give it back to you, give somebody a gift and they don't give it back to you, okay, they didn't just give it back, but they didn't really receive it. There's a way to receive a gift with joy and with gratitude, so that the giver gets a feeling of there's an exchange of energy, something's actually happened. But if you just give a gift and they put it on the side and you never hear from them again, it doesn't do anything for the giver. And it's the same in a conversation. If you're talking to somebody and they're not receiving your words, they might be hearing, but they're not receiving your words, it's very deflating. It's not possible to receive the words of another person if you're multitasking. You might be able to hear the words, but there's no way you can hear the nuance, and there's no way you can receive if your mind is somewhere else and your cell phone is on and your screen is buzzing and things are going on. It's not possible. It's just better to tell the other person, I can't listen to you at the moment. We'll have to find another time to talk, than to pretend that we are listening and to fool ourselves and to fool the other person, because people aren't fooled. They know that it's so. Listening to somebody and allowing somebody to unburden themselves, allowing somebody to share something of themselves, is an enormous act of generosity in itself. So when the Kohanim are giving the brocha, if we're not receiving it, yes, it's true, their head is covered, their eyes are covered, they can't see what we're doing. What do you think would happen if we all left the room? The Kohanim put the talis over their heads, and we all went out, and we come back when they finished their brocha. And we'll say they didn't even notice, they had the talis over their heads. I bet you they would notice. You know when you're talking to an empty room. And you know when you're talking to an empty heart. And you know when you're talking to an empty brain. Ask any rabbi who's ever given a shiur, not me, thank God. You're wonderful people. But ask any rabbi, do you know what it's like to talk to an empty room? No, I do it every Shabbos. Talk to an empty room. It doesn't matter if people are sitting there. Listening is an energetic thing. Listening invites the other person to give more. And the person gives more. An audience at a concert, an audience at a performance. The audience elicits more and more talent from the performer. That's the relationship. It's a two-way conversation. And by carefully listening and actively listening and graciously listening and listening with gratitude and accepting and taking it in, you're encouraging the other person to go a little further, to stretch a little further, to dig a little bit deeper, to share a little bit more. The listener plays an important part in the process. If you ever say to somebody, usually a close member family, you don't share with me, you don't tell me what's going on. First thing to question is, do I listen? Because if they're not telling me, if they're not sharing, if they're not being vulnerable, am I really listening? In a real true way. And there are ways to listen. And one has to get better and better at listening. For one's own good and one's for ability to interact with others and to get bracha from Hashem. Because bracha, we're learning, bracha comes when you listen to the bracha. But if you're not listening, you're blocking it. And then there's the piece about asking for it. Anybody who's ever been on the most basic of sales courses knows what's the most important thing for a salesperson to know? Ask for the order. And you say to yourself, but I don't need to ask. He knows. I'm a salesman. I've spent an hour speaking to him. Do I still have to ask for the order? Yes, you do. Because if you don't ask, you don't get. Why? Because there's humility in asking. And there's a suggestion in asking that I will have gratitude and appreciation for what I get. It's the opposite of entitlement. People who have entitlement don't ask. They expect you just to give. That's what entitlement means. To stand there in shul waiting for the KOHANIM to give you a bracha, that's entitlement. Ask for it. And that's why we say KOHANIM. It's an invitation to the KOHANIM. And that's why the Chazan reads out. KOHANIM, say to Hashem, Yivarechecha. KOHANIM, say to Hashem, Hashem. KOHANIM, say to Hashem, V'yishmerecha. Each word we ask the Kohen to say to Hashem. It's not just one act of asking. And Hashem says, that's what I want from you. I want you to ask for the bracha. Because then I know you'll appreciate it. When you get something you've never asked for, that's why we have to daven. Does Hashem not know what we want? He does know what we want, but He wants us to ask for it. Because if He gives it to us before we've asked for it, then there's no way we're going to value it and fully appreciate it. There's humility in asking. There's real humility in asking, I need your help. Do you think you can help me? And then people respond, try it out. I don't know of one case, and I've asked people all over the world, have you ever said to somebody, can you help me? And the other person has said no. Not one person has said to me they've ever experienced that. I'm sorry, I'm busy, I'm sorry, I'm in a rush, I'm sorry, I don't know. But nobody will say, can you help me? No. Can you help me? What's the matter? Sorry, that particular thing I can't help you with. But just to say no, and asking for somebody opens the channels of communication, opens the channels of generosity, and opens the channels of bracha. It's interesting that in the piece of Tanakh in Melachim, it's the Haftorah of Vayera. There's the famous story you remember with Elisha, and the woman comes to Elisha and says, you know that I was married to this wonderful man who died, and I'm left with debts, and they're coming to take my children as slaves and to take everything that I've got. The creditors are coming. I'm in a terrible situation. Please help. And Elisha does the miracle of pouring the oil, and until all her utensils are filled, then the oil stops. And we see there, she asks, she needs, and as long as she can receive it, he can give. The moment she can no longer receive it, he can no longer give. That's the dynamic. When you're not receiving, the giver stops giving. It's not just about the giving. It takes two to give. It takes two to be generous. The receiver plays as much of a role in generosity as the giver. The Tanakh goes on, and it's also part of the same Haftorah. It doesn't stop there. Then there's the other case. A very wealthy woman, a very wealthy family. And Elisha comes past her town, and she says to her husband, let us be the the base for this holy man that he comes and stays with us. Let's make a room for him. We'll have an Airbnb for him. We won't charge him. We'll build it on a Zimmer, as they say over here, and that's where he'll come when he's here, which is what they do. And he's very grateful. He's now the receiver. So as the receiver, he says to her, what can I do for you? She says, nothing. Baruch Hashem, I don't need anything. We've got whatever we have. Now, based on what we're saying now, what does that do? That's deflating for Elisha, and it stops the flow of bracha. So he turns to his servant, to Gehazi, and he says, what do we do for this woman? Gehazi says, you know what? She doesn't have any children, and her husband is old. She was probably also old. Elisha says, oh, that's a good idea. So he calls the woman, and he says, and next time I come round, you'll be holding a son. You'll have a child. She says, don't mock me. Don't tell me something that's impossible. So she's still not receiving. She hasn't asked, she doesn't ask, and she doesn't receive. What happens? She gets the son, because otherwise Elisha would be put to shame. But the son dies. It's not sustainable. A bracha that hasn't been asked for and appreciated and valued and received is not sustainable. And the son dies. Then she comes to Elisha and falls at his feet and says, my son is dead. What do? I need your help. And then Elisha goes and revives her. Because now she's asked. Now she's needed it. And now she'll appreciate it. And that whole haftarah, that whole piece of Tanakh, if you look at it in that light, is the framework and the principles of how to ask and how to receive. That some of the most generous things you can do is to receive. Some of the most generous things you can do is to listen. But to listen with the understanding of Unkelus, to be mekabel, to take it in. It's one of the most generous things you can do for a person. Because as I often tell my clients around the world, what is the scarcest resource that we have? They always answer time, and the answer is no. We've got lots of time. Time is actually not the problem. The problem is attention. We can't even pay attention for 2 or 3 minutes at a time. That's the scarce resource. To give somebody your attention. And that's why in English we use the word pay attention. It's like paying. It's a very scarce resource. If you give your attention to somebody, you're not giving it to somebody else at that time. If you give your attention to something, you're not giving it to something else at that time. You cannot give your attention to 2 things at the same time. So every time you're paying attention, you're making a values choice. You're important to me. In fact, right now, there's nothing more important to me than you. That's what paying attention means. But if the other person doesn't feel that, then one hasn't been generous in one's paying attention. And paying attention means listening. Paying attention means mekabel, to receive and to accept. The other one is to ask for help. We've done some amazing work, and you can appreciate it very easily, I think, in teaching busy executives who trained very differently, not to give instructions. Giving an instruction is very, very undermining for people. People hate it. We accept it in business because that's what you have to do. It's efficient. But nobody likes being told what to do. And if instead of telling somebody what to do, you ask them for their help, it would be so much more effective. Can you help me? I need this done. Sure. No problem. Do this. I got to get home. The whole attitude is different. And if we just drop the instructions and start with the requests, a call for help, where you're acknowledging, I can't do this without you, which means you're important to me. You're uplifting the other person by asking. That's why when you're selling, you've got to give the person who you're buying from a sense of value. I value you, customer. I'm asking for your business. I don't just value your business, I value you, and I value my relationship with you. And I would enjoy doing business with you. Can we talk about it? It's a very different way of being, it's a very different way of thinking, it's a different way of communicating, and all of that and a whole lot more that we don't have time right now to go into, we learn from this bracha, because this is the foundation of all brachas. This is the foundation of all brachot. And understanding the technology of this bracha gives us an inkling of all brachot. So all brachot should really be like that. May Hashem do the fine to you. And in that case, it's important that the person giving the bracha has a connection with Hashem. It's true, the Gemara says, even a birkat hediyat, even an ordinary person gives a bracha, it's valuable. Because Hashem looks at that and says, so-and-so is willing to give a bracha to so-and-so, then that person, it deserves something. There's some worthiness in it. But it's not the same as somebody who is close to Hashem, And the Kohanim are close to Hashem. Genetically, they're close to Hashem. Just in terms of their upbringing and their history, Kohanim are close to Hashem. They have it in their genes. And it doesn't only have to be Kohanim. Anybody we go to for a bracha, if it's somebody who's close to Hashem, sometimes it's somebody who has suffered, is very close to Hashem. There are many situations in which you can identify somebody who's close to Hashem. It's worthwhile getting a bracha, but the bracha is not a bracha from them to you. The bracha is really a tefillah from them to Hashem to give a bracha to you. So if we look at the whole sequence, what is it? I ask, you ask Hashem on my behalf, Hashem answers, I thank you. And of course I thank Hashem as well, but I thank you because you made it possible. That's the role of the Kohanim and the Birkat Kohanim, and that's the foundations and the principles of the flow of generosity. Generosity is a flow. Generosity is not a one-off thing. Generosity is a flow. And it flows from people, it flows from nature. The world is generous. The world renews itself. The world creates food over and over. The world's never run out of food. The population gets bigger and bigger. The world, Hashem created a generous world. Generosity is built into the Bria. But we've got to elicit it. And the way we elicit it is by asking for it. It's tefillah. Asking for it, and the way we elicit generosity in another person, a customer, a business colleague, a family member, the way we elicit generosity is to ask for it and to receive it.